Hi, good evening, guys, and welcome to the AnonUK and Ireland radio show. Okay, we have Schism, which is my other host, and we have our very special guest tonight, Machon, who's joining us. Good evening, Annie.
Hi.
And welcome to the show. Okay, now we got many listeners out here tonight. What we want to know is, we thought we'd kick straight off. When you were in Mi5, what was the initial situation or question that made you begin your journey to where you are today?
What the first thing I saw going wrong?
Yeah, what started the whole thing off?
Well, actually, it was sort of right up front, because during the recruitment process, they reassured me that they had to obey the law. They'd been put on a legal footing for the first time in 80 years at that point. If they wanted to do something which was otherwise deemed to be a crime, such as illegally recording your phone calls or breaking into your flat or something like that, they were supposed to get prior governmental permission to do it, to make it legal.
Okay.
And they also told me that they wanted me to work as a counter-terrorism officer. And they no longer did the reds under the bed, looking at activists and political subversives and things, because, of course, the Cold War had just finished. So that all sounded quite reassuring. So it was a bit of a shock when I first walked in and was told I was going to be posted to a little section called F2, which was the counter-subversion section, looking at reds under the bed.
Okay.
So right from the word go, it was sort of, oh, God, what have I got myself into? But you sort of, they carry on making reassuring noises, and you're reposted every 2 years to new sections. Mm-hmm. And you sort of think, well, you know, okay, that was an old-fashioned one, that was bad, but perhaps the next one would be better. And then you see more and more things going more and more wrong. So it's a sort of process like boiling a frog. Right. And at some point you just realise it's getting too hot and you hop out.
Okay. Wow. So, I mean, watching your videos, I mean, you were in France, weren't you, at one point? I mean, did you have any identity when you were actually, you had to leave the country? Did you have an identity?
Well, only my own.
only your own as a human being?
Sorry?
Only your own as a human being?
Exactly. No, I had to hand in all my fake passports and all that sort of thing, which was a bit of a bummer. I should have held on to them. Anyway.
Wow. Schism, any questions there?
Well, yeah, I mean, I watched your interview with
Max Kaiser?
Yeah, the Kaiser.
The Kaiser report, yes.
The Kaiser report, yeah, I really lost my mind there. And you were mentioning the fact that Occupy were considered terrorists. I mean, how serious do you think that actually is with the old Occupy? And I mean, I know Anonymous has been, classified as, or possibly classified as terrorists in some countries, or even been, politicians have attempted to make us classified as terrorists. How serious do you think they take that?
I think they're taking it more and more seriously, and people who are involved in those sort of activities need to take it very seriously as well and start teching up and protecting themselves. So, for example, when I first joined Mi5 20 years ago, it's a long time ago now, they were winding down the study of the political subversive section. That then got hived off to the Metropolitan Special Branch, the Secret Police, a section called SDS, Special Duties Section, which then got hived off in its own turn from the police to the Association of Chief Police Officers, ACPO, which is a private limited company. And this was the group that hit the headlines a couple of years ago with the undercover cop scandal. So they have certainly been out there on behalf of the state, infiltrating activist groups, peace groups, environmental groups. And I'm also aware that there's been an explosion in sort of private mercenary spy companies. In the old days, there used to be a few like Kroll or Diligence, and now we're seeing huge numbers of them out there being employed by big corporations to spy on activist groups that might potentially embarrass or cause problems to the profits of the big corporations. So it's not just Mi5 and the major state apparatus that activists need to be aware of. They need to be aware that the undercover cops are there, and they need to be aware of the mercenary spies who can do the plausibly deniable work that the state police and perhaps even state intelligence agencies cannot do. So people do need to be aware of this. And the fact that there was a leak which showed that the City of London were warning banks in the city that Occupy could be deemed to be domestic extremists or a terrorist group showed that they're really over-egging the pudding now. And they will use that as justification for aggressive investigation into activists involved in these sort of areas. And as I said, people need to be very aware. It's not, people joke about it a bit and they say, oh, we might be spied on at this meeting or something. It is a very real threat, and we do need to protect ourselves about it. I don't mean disappear down some sort of paranoid rabbit hole and never emerge, but just make realistic threat assessments and protect yourself.
So, I mean, is there ways? I mean, is there ways you can recommend people? I mean, there's an awful lot of anons who kind of use Facebook and so forth. Is there ways for you? Is there ways for anons to sort of recognise these kind of secret spies and to look for sort of clues into talking to and so forth? Is there a way of? Is there? I mean, I know it's all going to be social engineering in a lot of sense, but is there ways of actually recognising these people and what they do and say? I mean, it's obviously quite difficult, I guess, but.
There are certain things you can look for in terms of infiltrators, but I would say up front, Facebook is doing the jobs of the spy agencies. In fact, they're doing the job the spy agencies could only have wet dreams about, even 10 years ago. If people use Facebook to put all their contacts out there, to show their networks of friends, to make plans about events that they're then going to go along and attend, you're giving the spies all the information they need to investigate you. And it's not about evidence that might be used against you in court necessarily. I mean, it could be further down the line, but it's just about giving them intelligence about what you're up to, what you're thinking about, what your strategy is, what you're planning. So I would say to any activist, any serious activist, do not use Facebook. I mean, don't not use it necessarily just to have a presence. I have a presence on Facebook, but I certainly would never use it to plan things or to organize events or whatever. So those areas, Facebook, Twitter, any of the big social networking sites are completely exploded as far as security goes, and all that information is hoovered up by the NSA and the GCHQ and things like that. So never use that for planning. If you want to start using the internet to plan stuff and to strategize about where you want to go as a campaign, I would suggest perhaps an encrypted open source wiki or something where you can get together and plan. I'm not the geek. I'm not the geeks. So I feel a bit sort of like a fraud saying this, but I have been involved in certain activist groups and I can see the pitfalls. So that's one aspect. The other aspect in terms of infiltration, there's no hard and fast rule, but certainly if people are working undercover, then they're not going to be there all the time. They will want to go back and dip into their normal lives. So if people show up, are very willing to do all the really boring grunt work without complaint, which everyone else tries to avoid, and then suddenly they sort of disappear off for a day or two every week, that might be suspicious. If you never know where they're going, you never meet their other friends or their back social life, that might be suspicious in itself. And one of the key things that infiltrators are always tasked to do is to get a whole sort of network and plans and what have you. So they tend to go for the sort of boring admin jobs. So that might be an indicator. But it's that sort of occasional unavailability or even regular unavailability can be a bit of an indicator.
Sounds like the average of none, actually, but
oh yeah.
Yeah. We have actually had a question. Actually, what's the difference between MI5 and GCHQ?
Well, there are three key spy agencies in the UK, which have evolved historically, and it's basically a British muddle. So MI5 is the UK Domestic Security Service, which in the old days used to be truncated down to UKSS. Someone in Germany pointed out the historic connotation. Then we got MI6, which is the sort of James Bond wannabes. They do the foreign intelligence gathering. And GCHQ is the third and least spoken about agency. This is based down in Cheltenham. And this is the big government electronic eavesdropping communication centre. And it works very, very closely with the US equivalent, the NSA, which has now just set up a whole new city in Utah, I gather, which is built around a supercomputer to hoover up all information everywhere. And historically, they've shared things very closely. And that has allowed them to evade any notional democratic oversight. There's a program called Echelon, which has been going for decades now, where GCHQ, the NSA, and also the equivalent agencies in Canada, New Zealand, and Australia all share information. So, for example, GCHQ could not, without government permission, eavesdrop on your conversations electronically in the UK. But the NSA can do that from America because it's foreign land. GCHQ can do it in America because it's their foreign land. So then they can hoover up stuff for each other and then share it together. So they're the sort of the geeks of the intelligence world, and they have expanded massively since 9/11. They've had a huge amount of money pumped into them. They're much bigger than they used to be.
Wow. Yeah, they've got a place in Australia now as well, haven't they?
They have, yeah. Well, they've had a place in Australia, ever since Echelon's been up and running. As I said, it's the old Commonwealth and America and the UK have been linked on this front. If anyone wants to Google it, it's Echelon is ECHELON. It was exposed by a very good investigative journalist called Duncan Campbell way back in the 80s, and nobody really seemed to be that worried about it at the time. But it's quite a problem in terms of democratic oversight.
Yeah, definitely. But then another question asking about Face Deal.
Mm.
What is it and what does it do?
This is something I stumbled across a while ago. I wrote about it on my website in a post called The Scorpion Stare, which was shamelessly stolen from one of my favourite authors, Charles Stross. And you read it? Brilliant.
Bit of a Lovecraft Cthulhu fan, so Charles Stross is quite.
Absolutely. Well, his laundry series, the Atrocity Archives and everything, are wonderful because they really capture the tone of what it's like to work in a secret agency. I mean, it's much more accurate than most other fictional works about spies, so I do recommend them. So Face Deal is something that I stumbled across, which sounds hideous because it's sort of linked into Facebook, and it's a sort of corporatized merchandising version of it. So, for example, using facial recognition patterns and Facebook photo tagging, if you use a favorite restaurant or a favorite shop or whatever, and they recognize that you're going in there, then Face Deal is programmed to send you updates and offers and special deals at your favorite restaurant or your favorite shop or whatever. So it's like a sort of Tesco loyalty card, but with hideous spy bells attached to it. So basically what it's doing, and I don't think it's been rolled out yet, it's on trial in America at the moment, but basically what it's doing is it's bribing us to allow them to spy on us even more. And then, of course, you get into a situation where you have this, you have Google Earth, you have facial recognition patterns on CCTV and issues like Trapwire, which was exposed by WikiLeaks last year, which even looks at how we walk to identify us. And suddenly we do find ourselves in this panopticon dystopia.
Wow.
Yeah, so I mean, we've got a lot of operations with Op Trapwire, Op Index. And it is getting kind of crazy. I mean, it's not something that, it seems like the UK have kind of are trailing behind on it a little bit because it seems to be very European, very American, especially Op Index, which seems very European. I know that it's getting, obviously the surveillance situation is getting worse in the UK. I mean, there's something like there's over 1.82 million CCTV cameras in Britain, and it's got the Prime Minister's just now sort of mentioned, put more drones into the air over the UK, and how far will it go? I mean, how far can they go with it? Obviously they're now already, they're already infringing upon our human rights with this whole new bill that they're going to put through. I mean, how far can they actually go with this? I mean,
they can go as far as they want because most people don't care. That's the problem. I mean. Yeah, well, the question is, are we able to stop them now? Because I've been saying probably for about a decade now, it's almost like a sort of arms race between getting people aware of these issues and why it's important to preserve our hard-won civil liberties and human rights, one with blood, sweat and tears over 500 years in Europe, by the way, and their arms race to get as much tech in place to be able to have this sort of panopticon surveillance society so they can crack down on dissenters with ease in the future. And at the moment, I think they're beginning to win the race a little bit. A couple of years ago, I'd said actually the geek community was ahead, what with WikiLeaks and the start of Anonymous and things. But now all these new texts that are being revealed by the state are frightening. I mean, there was something I read yesterday about, it was in New York, the sort of biometric surveillance system they're planning on rolling out, and all the new bits that they can look at, which pick up not just things like your face or even the shape of your ears or the way you walk. And if you loiter with intent, it might mean you're about to do a terrorist act or something. They're actually looking at things as well, like picking up your scent or DNA or long distance iris recognition. So this sounds very sort of high tech, sort of Minority Report and everything. But I'm sure these things are being considered. If they're being reported on, they've probably already been developed. It's just a case of rolling them out.
It's certainly scary, isn't it? What's coming.
Yes. And also knowing how they will abuse it once they've got it. Because, there is a will to power. All governments love power. Mm-hmm. And the more power they have, and the intelligence agencies as well, knowledge is power. And the more knowledge they have about all of us, wherever we go, gives them more power and leverage over us. So, yeah, it is frightening.
Well, do you, just another question. When all these new surveillance protocols, we hear about like their drafts that they got, their plans of what they do you think that they're already in place and they're just being tested, but that now they have to make it public?
Well, they've got a slightly sticky position still, because notionally we're still democracies. So notionally they still have to get these laws out and approved and voted on, which of course can be lobbied through not just our national governments, but also organisations like the EU Parliament. I mean, things like ACTA, they tried to rubber stamp that through without most of our representatives even being allowed to read the legislation they were asked to sign.
Right.
So that is going on, certainly. but there will be secret techniques that the spy agencies are already using,
Yeah.
and they will be allowed to use those under the terms of the Security Service Act 1989 and the Intelligence Service Act 1994, which covers MI6 and GCHQ. They will be allowed to use those with proviso, notionally, that they get prior written permission from their political masters. So in MI5's case, that's the Home Secretary. In MI6 and GCHQ's case, that's the Foreign Secretary. Now, I know from bitter personal experience how easily these warrants can be pushed up to the politicians, and they are very watered down. The case that is presented to the politicians is minimal, and no politician ever says no to signing one of these things in case something goes terribly wrong and a bomb goes off or something. So it is a fig leaf. The warrantry system is a fig leaf. So if there is some new surveillance technique out there which we're as yet unaware of, they probably will need to go through this process, and we won't know about it, and they will say it's legal.
Wow. Amazing. Schism?
It's hard to follow that.
I'm curious about the name Schism, actually. What's going on? Have there been schisms?
Are you asking where it came from, or why I chose it, or?
Absolutely.
I don't know really. I mean, I've been on Non now for a few years, and it was just, I don't know, it was just one of those things. I was kind of looking, when you sort of join up, if you like, you've obviously got to go under a sort of a fake name and that. And so I kind of thought, what should I choose and stuff, and there's all these sort of standard things and that. But I don't know, it just kind of jumped out at me, and it was kind of sort of seemed to make sense a little bit. So I thought I'd just choose it. I mean, it's not the only thing I go under, so I go under like Freak, so.
No, that's great. Just hoping it wasn't reality, that was all.
My public kind of, if you like, my public name.
I have a quick question from one of our other hosts. It's what are the implications of someone being a member of Anonymous if, in the future, it is deemed by law as a domestic terror organisation?
Basically, you're fucked.
Well, there you have it, guys.
No, I mean, as soon as anyone is designated to be a suspected terrorist, in this day and age, you effectively lose all your basic legal rights.
Right.
You can be snatched, you can be extraordinarily rendered, you can be tortured, and they'll deny it, of course. Now it doesn't happen. No. But no, the magic word terrorist seems to give them all sorts of rights over what they can do to you, and takes away all sorts of rights from what you can expect from the law, particularly as now when they're trying to introduce this new secret court legislation, the Justice Bill, Bill, where they want to be able to hold trials and court cases in secret. And they're doing this because they say it's only fair to the security services, the MI5, MI6, etc., to be able to have a fair say during this hearing, and they can't do it if it's an open hearing, which is bogus, because these sorts of trials have been going on for decades already. If they want to have a secret bit in a trial, then they can use PIs, government gagging orders. They can take the case in camera, make it secret and chuck everyone out. They can put a governmental super injunction on it. They can hide the witnesses. So what these secret courts are, it's not about protecting intelligence on the grounds, very nebulous grounds, by the way, of national security, which has never been legally defined under British law. What it does is it takes away any right of the defendant or the claimant to hear what is said in the court on their behalf. They're not even allowed to have their lawyer in the courtroom, let alone themselves. So it becomes truly Kafkaesque. As soon as you're labelled a terrorist, if this new bill goes through, then you will be stuck in that position. So this is serious, guys. I mean, really, as soon as you get that label stuck to you, it's just a nightmare.
Yeah, I mean, I've had the label. Well, I believe I've had the label stuck to me already because I asked for an FOI from the NSA and GCHQ. Both were denied. They denied both of mine. They saying it was a threat to national security, and I've got my letters still here. And I appealed it with NSA. I rang them up the other day, and they're still looking into my appeal. But I know I'm going to get a negative response back from them.
Well, you will, because they're all exempt under the FOI.
Yeah.
I mean, just that's it, blanket ban. You will get nothing out of the intelligence agencies, which is, again, unique. In most Western countries, you can get some sort of information. So, for example, there's a wonderful Dutch internet activist called Rob Gongrijk, who has been a pain in the authorities' side, she said politely, for the last 20 years plus. and he was allowed to get all the Dutch intelligence reports and files on him, so long as they were older than 10 years old. So, most other Western countries you can get some information, but not in the US, not in the UK, and particularly not if you're associated with something they can even begin to think about calling a terrorist organisation or a domestic extremist.
Yeah.
So in terms of protecting yourself, I mean, like I said, I feel a bit bogus talking about this to Anonymous of all people. It's not just about the secure wiki thing. I mean, I do hope that everyone's using OpenPGP, and they are encrypting their emails, and they are just conscious that there can be things like keystroke loggers automatically put onto your computers remotely, that your mobile phone can be recording what you're saying when you're sitting next to it, even though it's not on. Mm-hmm. It's all those sort of things. You do need to get a bit paranoid, but in a healthy way.
Yeah, we had somebody ask about the encryption. Just trying to find it. It said, do secret agencies have special methods of breaking encryption, or are they just like the rest of us?
I don't know the answer to that, I'm afraid. No. I wasn't on that side of the work, and even though when I was there, it was getting on for 20 years ago, so they were pretty backward at that point, but I'm sure they've caught up rapidly. And as I said, GCHQ has expanded massively since 9/11, so
I bet,
I think they've probably got some fairly good people there now.
Yeah. Somebody just said, are you still bound by the Official Secrets Act?
I am still bound by the Official Secrets Act, yes. The reason I can talk about certain things is because they're already in the public domain.
Yeah, of course.
Which was the ruling that was put in place with the 80s whistleblower, Peter Wright, and the spy catcher scandal. Yeah. So I had a book published years ago, which was cleared, sort of. So anything in that I can talk about, anything that David Shaler spoke about all those years during his case I can talk about. And there's still things I couldn't. But I think we got pretty much everything we wanted to get out in public, which was what we thought was in the public interest. Things have gone wrong, crimes committed, mistakes made, not the successes. I mean, they're not all bad people. A lot of people go into this line of work trying to make a difference, and protect people from the bad guys or whatever. Yeah. The trouble is, once you're sort of enmeshed in this very closed world, you get quite trapped in it, and you get subjected to groupthink, and it's difficult to raise questions and ask about ethical issues because you're just told up to shut up and not rock the boat.
Right.
So they're not all bad people; they're human beings too. It's just I think some of them who stay there too long can be very corrupted.
Yeah. Schism, any questions?
Yeah. Do you have any? Recently, I would say recently, about 6 months ago, maybe even a year now. Time goes so fast. There was an MI5 officer who was found dead in his apartment. I think he was cut up and put into a bag, I think. Mm. Any thoughts on that? I mean, it was a bit of a strange one. It was kind of released and then it was kind of covered up and nobody really kind of gave any kind of opinion or whatsoever. I mean, is that kind of a common thing that happened in MI5?
Not really, no. In fact, he was a GCHQ guy. He was a code breaker, Gareth Williams. And he was on secondment to MI6 for a couple of years. And by the sounds of it, was having quite a rough time there. There's a sort of huge culture difference. So I don't think we're ever going to get to the bottom of what happened to him. I mean, it was an awful case. And there's been so much misinformation leaked as well. This, of course, is ahead, before the whole phone hacking News International scandal where all the sort of too close connections were exposed about, the police and the press and all that sort of thing. But one thing that has come out of it was he had the inquest into his death about 6 months ago. And from the evidence there produced, it became obvious that MI6 had completely blocked the investigation into his murder. They had stopped the police coming in and interviewing people that Gareth Williams was working with. And they had taken a very arrogant line that they were above the law. They didn't need to cooperate with the plod, as they would call the police. So I think that was interesting in itself, that MI6 just thought they could just block everything off. They didn't have to answer for anything, and that's quite worrying in itself. But no, I mean, the case itself was awful.
Wow. So, I mean, do you think, that there's this kind of culture that's kind of, I don't know how recent it is. I mean, obviously, it's been going for a long while, but there's more of a culture now within government and things like MI5 and GCHQ. But it's kind of like almost like it is kind of an old boy network where they kind of think themselves above laws and they think they can do what they want and they see normal people, the people on the street as just numbers or just people who don't really matter. Do you think there's a big culture in that? Because obviously, the word terrorism is used now to sort of float around for pretty much most things. And it's almost like it's their way of justifying anything they kind of want to do to the average person. And on a recent like horse meat sort of situation where it was only in cheap food, basically meaning that the average person buys. Do you think there's this culture now where, in the government and, in these intelligence agencies where they don't really give a toss about the average person, about what laws they want to pass, and it's all in it for themselves?
I think there's certainly a cultural misunderstanding. I mean, a lot of these people, if we want to call it the establishment or whatever, I mean, they all float around. They come from fairly wealthy backgrounds, go to good private schools, go to good universities, and they almost have a revolving door situation between government, politics, the civil service, the city, arms industry, the spies, the media. And you can certainly see these people are quite chummy, quite sort of pally at the top. And I actually don't think they really have a very good grip on what normal life is for most people.
Oh, no.
And they do feel a sense of entitlement. Absolutely, there's no doubt about it. And certainly within the intelligence agencies, that becomes very condensed. As I said, you get sort of groupthink mentality. Once you're in there, it's very difficult to have a normal life outside because you can't talk about your work. So old friends tend to drop away. You socialise more and more with your colleagues. Usually you end up sleeping with them as well. So relationships are usually quite encouraged. And it becomes more and more inward looking. And it does cut you off from real life. It is very insulating. It's a bit of a problem. And that's not to say all these people are bad. I mean, a lot of them do want to do a good job on the inside and stop nasty things happening. There's without a doubt. But I think if there is no ventilation, if there is no real meaningful oversight and no accountability, which is what we have particularly in the UK compared to most other Western countries even, then you get a situation where they can spiral out of control because they can block investigations, because they know they can hide behind the fig leaf that is national security. And where you get a situation, for example, where in the 1990s, they wouldn't go anywhere near the issue of torture. One, because it's illegal, it's unethical, but also because it had been used in the civil war in Northern Ireland in the 70s, and they saw how counterproductive it was. So it was a very utilitarian judgment as well. And of course, since 9/11, now we've seen them getting really involved with the issues of torture because of what the Americans went, that path they went down. So if you get that sort of poisonous little seed sown into their sort of root thing, it can flourish. And I think that's why they've had such a problem with issues like torture. And they do seem more and more cut off from the concerns of normal people.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely see that a lot. I mean, do you think, obviously if you've got groups of people who are kind of, as you say, spending a lot of time with each other and they have this kind of, like you say, groupthink, and they start sort of defending each other and so forth and so on, they get kind of wrapped up in this whole kind of little sort of subculture, if you like, of themselves, which is kind of, well-off, wealthy, kind of Eton, Cambridge, Oxford sort of backgrounds. Do you think this can affect things like recent sort of paedophile cover-ups, which we know, everybody kind of suspects has infiltrated, there is aspects of the government involved in it. Do you think that would even be something that would be covered up because of this whole kind of groupthink sort of mentality?
I think there's a possibility. I mean, they look after each other. It's sort of chaps looking after chaps, or historically it has been. They would say they're more modern than that now. But one of the things that was interesting, because of all this cascade of hideous paedophile story coming out over the last few months, was the issue of Cyril Smith, the Liberal MP in the 70s, and a story about his abuse of boys in a care home was resurrected. It was broken in the late 1970s and covered up by the sounds of it. And from what I read in the press, not that I believe everything I read in the press, what happened was people from London, it was assumed Mi5, went into the local police and took all the files. So a lot of the vital information was discreetly disposed of because he was a high-flying MP at the time. So it can go on, there's no doubt about it. And there are other issues as well. I mean, things like, what was his name? Lord Lambton, who was a defence minister, I think, in the early 1970s. Was persona non grata because he'd asked too many awkward questions about the spies, and then he got set up and exposed. So it can work both ways if you're in the establishment. If you don't do what you're told, then they will out you. And if you do what you're told, then you're protected. I mean, even you can go back even further to the Cambridge spy ring. Kim Philby, Burgess, McLean, people like that. And if you're aware of that, it's an old scandal from the 50s, 60s. And these people egregiously betrayed their country over years, giving away agent names where those agents in Russia were then taken out and murdered and, just extrajudicially killed. It was awful. But because they were part of the inner circle, definitely the good boys from the good schools and the good universities, they were ignored for years. Our chaps wouldn't do that. They certainly had the opportunity to flee the country before they faced prosecution. And the last guy to be caught in that was Sir Anthony Blunt, who was the Queen's Surveyor of Pictures. And he was protected because he was related to the royal family. And then when he was ousted by Thatcher in 79, was only stripped of his knighthood. He wasn't prosecuted under the Official Secrets Act, despite everything he'd done. So no, this sort of protectionism definitely goes on.
Wow. I'm just sat here with you're just shocked.
Just going back to the good comms practice, secure comms. I've got a wonderful link. It's on a website, and it's saying if you want to protect how you communicate with people and do activism, I'm just going to send it through to you on this chat thing. Okay. I don't know if you want to use it, but it's definitely worth a read.
Okie doke.
Sort of practice I use.
Excellent. We'll have a look at. A question is, what is your ultimate message you are trying to get across? I mean, in what you do and everything, what is your ultimate message you're trying to put across to the people?
God, that's a difficult question.
I mean, is it a multitude of everything then? Is it just like a big ingredient?
Yeah, it's a big cake that's been baked. It's a difficult one. I mean, I suppose I see what I talk about, what I write about, what I do interviews about now. I would see condensed into 3 issues, which are the 3 wars, in my view, which is the war on terror and how it's being used against the vast majority of us, the 99%, to take away our civil liberties, and as well as all the murder and mayhem and displacement and poisoning and rape that's gone on across great swathes of the world. Ditto with the war on drugs, the failed experiment from the last 40 years. And finally, the war on the internet, as I call it, which is some of the issues we've been talking about, where they're trying to use issues like copyright and piracy as stalking horses, almost, to take away our freedom of free media, where we can freely discuss, we can freely read, download, think, promulgate ideas. So I think those 3 issues and areas I see as very interconnected, because they're all these bogus wars in order to take away our freedoms as citizens, freedoms which we fought for, as I mentioned before, over 500 years since the Enlightenment in Europe, to try and get in place to protect the common man against the aggressive 1% or the aggressive elites. And at the moment, because of these 3 wars, we are seeing a massive backward step that is eroding and threatening all of us. And I think that's really what I'm trying to get across, and use my, I suppose, background, although it's well in my background now, and also my current experience, to try and get some of those messages across. Like I said, it's an arms race between getting people to be aware of these and protecting themselves, and them clamping down on this. And if we're not careful, we're going to wake up literally in 1984, but with higher tech.
Wow. I mean, because with the whistleblowing, obviously it's been in the media just recently about how they want to gag the media. That if the whistleblower comes to them with stuff, they basically got to turn it into the higher authorities, which is shocking. I mean, have you got any views on that?
1 or 2.
It's kind of similar to what they do in places like, as I said before, like Bahrain and the Middle Eastern countries where they arrest bloggers and they arrest people and so forth. It's no different, really, is it?
No, not at all. I mean, for example, there's one example that springs to mind from the royal wedding I wrote about, when was it, 2011. So at that point, Syria was just kicking off, that whole messy civil war, and they're backing the Islamists again and blah, blah, blah. So we have a situation where Syria is being excoriated by the West. William Hague, our foreign secretary, or was at the time, stood up and said, this is terrible. They are preemptively arresting people they deem to be dissidents in Syria and hauling them off to prison. And at the same time, they were doing exactly the same thing on people who wanted to demonstrate against the royal wedding for whatever reason in the UK. So these people were being rounded up 24 hours before the royal wedding because they might potentially do something. So effectively, they're being arrested for thought crime and incarcerated for a day, so they can't do it. And one of the people was a sociology professor from a London university who had a fake guillotine, and he was going to take it down to the Mall. And he had a dummy of Prince Andrew that he was going to guillotine. So it's going to be a piece of street theatre. And he got banged up in Chokey for 24 hours for this, for his thought crime.
Because one of them,
So,
what was the other guy that was? He's quite famous on YouTube. I've gone blank on his name. Um,
Charlie Beach.
Charlie
Yeah.
Veach, yeah, because he was put away, wasn't he? For was it 48 hours or something like that?
He was, yeah, he just disappeared into the system as well. I mean, at the time, his girlfriend at the time, Silky Carlo, couldn't find him. He was imprisoned in Cambridge, which is where they were living. And then he was taken off to some London Metropolitan Police Station, and nobody could track down what had happened to him.
Wow.
And the irony being, of course, that on the same day, good old Wills and Kate were given the title of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, which I thought was highly ironic.
It's just mad.
But I mean, I know what it feels like. I remember when David Shayler was arrested. This was in Paris in '98, and the Brits tried to extradite him from France to face official secrecy charges, and they failed. But he just vanished. I mean, he just got picked up off the street and thrown in prison, and even his lawyers couldn't track him down for 3 days.
Wow.
It's frightening, and that's where this is why when I talk about the encroachment of police states, the idea that you can be deemed to be a domestic extremist or a terrorist, and then you lose your rights and you get thrown in prison, you disappear. This is precisely what happens as countries slide towards some sort of fascistic, corporatist, power broking situation. I mean, it happened in Germany in the 30s. People just disappeared.
I mean, it's interesting you say that, because there's been a few instances where anons have kind of mentioned that they've been taken off the street and blindfolded and taken to places and drugged and asked questions, and then like 2 days later dumped back on the street again. And there's
Really?
there's been a few instances of that happening.
In the UK?
No, in America mainly.
Oh, God.
But it's happened a few times, and it's now getting to the point where, at first it was kind of somebody sort of mentioned it happened to them, and then a few more people mentioned it. And so, I mean, whether you believe it's true or not or whatever, but it does seem a bit kind of, and I don't know who's doing it. There's no agency that admits to it. There's no kind of mention of who they are, who's doing it, and so forth. So it's possibly corporate, mercenaries or whatever. But it is kind of a bit of a worry when, that sort of thing, if it is true, that it is starting to happen.
It is starting to happen. I mean, I've read stories as well about Occupy activists who've been treated like that as well, where they've had the jackhammer on the front door, no warning, and sort of militarized police agencies breaking into their flats, hooding them, cuffing them, taking them away with no real due process, and then their houses being ransacked for information. And this is something, it is a reality, I know it is. And they've been doing this, as I said, it's 3 wars. They've been doing this sort of thing with the war on drugs for 4 decades now in America. And it's been used as an excuse to militarize the police. So the police are no longer a service that's supposed to serve the community. They're there to militarily police the community and terrorize them. Which is why one of the other areas of work I'm involved in is law enforcement against prohibition, which is a global group of lawyers and police and spooks and judges and drug czars and people who are all saying, look, guys, the war on drugs has failed. And this has been used as a pretext to terrorize segments of population. In the US, for example, the black community particularly has been victimized because of the drug war. Now we've got the war on terror, and we have seen the Muslim community across all our countries being victimized because of the war on terror. I mean, in the 80s, when the IRA was going on, it was the Irish community. And now we're seeing the internet community facing the same terrorization.
Yeah, I mean, I've always thought the war on drugs must be the CIA taking out the opposition, really.
Well, they don't want to. I mean, it's a great funding mechanism.
It's just, no, you can't tell. We're the ones who sell the drugs, not you, sort of thing, actually. But no, it is interesting that that's kind of happening. I mean, I don't know if you saw the recent report about the Department of Homeland Security doing exercises where they're shooting sort of civilians who are kind of pretending to be zombies. And obviously sort of trying to desensitize the Department of Homeland Security kind of cops, if you like, to be sort of shooting civilian people and not have to worry about it, seeing them as a sort of mindless kind of, things.
Yes.
I mean, do you feel, with like the current situation in America, do you feel that America is kind of gearing itself up for a civil war?
Yes, I think is a simple answer. We have a situation in America where the gulf between the top financial elite, the 1%, whatever we want to call it, and the rest is so vast. It's wider than it was in pre-revolutionary France in the 18th century. And they know that something's going to blow because they haven't even got enough money to pay the interest on their huge debt. They are bankrupt as a country. but they're sort of enthralled to the corporatist interests, which mean that all the money, the only real growth area they have is one, the arms and military sector, the military industrial complex, and also the privatized prison complex, which of course is fed by people from the war on drugs. So that also turns a profit. But those are the only two growth industries in America. Everything else is broken. And they know that something's going to have to give at some point. They're not stupid. Like I said, it's an arms race between people waking up to what's going on and them having enough powers to control those people when they get a bit lippy. And if there are wide-scale riots in America, it's going to be a bloodbath. They're all armed to the teeth anyway. It's not, it's not like
this law when they get all the guns off them, which is what they're probably trying to do it for, get all the guns off of civilians before this happens, so they don't worry about it so much. I mean, how long do you think that'll happen before it happened in the UK? I mean, they've obviously already started the whole French thing where, you know, let them eat cake is kind of now sort of turned into let them eat horse meat. So, how long do you think it's going to happen before, you know, that sort of thing starts? I mean, obviously it's not going to be as bad because none of us are armed. They're not, well, you know, you like to think none of us are armed.
Well, actually, that one side is armed, which is we're not.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, there's been situations in the past with the UK where, you know, people have stood up and have changed things, you know, for good. But it hasn't happened for quite a long time. I mean, I think the last time was probably things like the Jarrow marches and so forth. Is the most recent thing I can think of. That weren't suppressed by, you know, like Thatcher's miners and so forth. But do you think that's something that could possibly happen in the UK? Because at the moment, I'm feeling that the UK is very kind of lethargic almost.
Let's have a cup of tea and everything will be all right.
You can't carry on. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
UK is an interesting one because, of course, we were the first country in modern Europe to have a revolution. We lopped off a king's head in the 17th century. And this is where not only did we rise up and seize power from the monarchy and demand proper accountability in Parliament, but also it was quite extreme. I mean, think about groups like the Levellers. Every man and even some women asked for rights within a democracy. You know, there should be one vote per person and things. So this was incredibly early. I mean, the 1640s compared to most other European countries and even America. So it has happened before. But since then, I think the establishment in the UK has become very savvy. It has always given a bit. When the pressure is built up too much, they give a little bit. So we had the 1688 Bill of Rights. We've had, you know, every time there's been a sort of real upswell of indignation, they've given away a little bit more power, be it to men of property for a vote or to all men for a vote or even eventually to some women with property for a vote. They've always been quite canny in managing that pressure cooker in the way that some other more totalitarian or royalist European countries haven't managed. So it'll be interesting to see. The sense I'm getting from the government at the moment is they are certainly being portrayed as a bunch of very elite rich boys who are completely disconnected from reality. So it could happen under them. I mean, you know, the nasty party and the old Etonians. But I think that the establishment, which is far broader and wider and very deeply and richly embedded in the country, like a big fat parasite, will see if there's a problem, get rid of them and get something in and give a little bit of power away again. And the Brits will just carry on the way they always have and not make too much of a fuss. And, you know, having a bit of a revolution and chucking some cobblestones around is always very, you know, it's a bit French really, isn't it?
That's true.
Yeah.
But that's not to say it's wrong. I mean, the French had a really good crack at it in 1789.
I mean, I think there's definitely a media way of views, you know, sort of saying things. There's definitely a way of saying things that actually kind of make people think that's a stupid idea to do that. I mean, they have a good way of wording stuff to make people think that it's not a good idea, or, you know, they make a joke about it, or, you know, like the stay calm and, you know, that sort of stuff. And it is kind of interesting that England seems at the moment very subdued, even though all this stuff's going on. You know, and there's things like Goldman Sachs handing out, you know, massive bonuses, and Barclays handing out massive bonuses, but nobody says anything about it. You know, it's just, it just seems to me that it's a bit sort of quite shocking, really.
I think it's appalling. Yes, I mean, I've been joking about this for years, ever since that ghastly program started, Big Brother. And the idea being that you go in there, you give up all notions of privacy, you allow yourself to be surveyed for 24 hours a day, and if you're lucky, you win it, and you get a C-list celeb lifestyle. I mean, it's like grooming people to be surveyed. And yet it was one of the most watched programs. So the dumbing down, the sort of bread and circuses, you know, SOMA, whatever you want to call it, aspect of the mainstream media has been hellish in the UK over the last couple of decades. And I do think the mainstream media as well is something to beware. I mean, I read it avidly still. I'm a bit of a news freak and all that sort of thing. I love hoovering up information, but you've got to get your information from a variety of sources. And the mainstream media is owned by major corporations who are all pals with the powers that be, and you can't rely on it. They will, of course, spin. And again, if you go back to what happened in the 1930s Nazi Germany, once the Nazi party had power, they seized all the media outlets. They made sure that people only ingested the information that they wanted them to ingest. And it's very easy to manipulate a population once you get to that position. So, thank God for the internet. And that's precisely why they're trying to crack down on it so deeply at the moment.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I think most people kind of we'd like to think that most people kind of understand that.
Yes, one hopes. And also the digital natives. I mean, I'm an oldie, I'm in my 40s, so I'm not a digital native. So I can remember how bad it was in the old days. But, for anyone under 30, certainly, they will have known nothing else but the internet being there. And God, use it. If you don't use it, you'll lose it. And fight for it.
Yeah, totally.
It's madness. So any more questions for you, Schism?
Yeah, I've got some more for you.
I'm just thinking of Annie with her time.
Yeah. Just looking at the pad, really, and what people have asked us to ask.
I got a quick one for you. What's your views on? You might not have any whatsoever, but do you have any suspicions or on Jacintha with the royal situation with the nurse that time? Is it all case closed, all over and done with, or do you think there's a little bit more to it?
I don't even know what the case is. What's Jacintha?
Jacintha, with the nurse that committed suicide for passing the call of Kate Middleton over.
Oh, yes. I don't have any views on it, I'm afraid. I'm sort of out of the country and didn't really follow it too closely.
Yeah, it's just all very, very, very suspicious. We just thought you might have some views, but that's answered that one for that viewer, listener. Go ahead, go on then, Schism.
I've got a question here from one of our listeners. I think it's from one of our listeners. It's sort of asking, what are you... It's from somebody. It's from 5 it's called. I don't know who they are. But, what are your views on things like, like activist groups like Anonymous, and also the sort of a ground op sort of section of Anonymous as well?
I think it's fabulous. I've been a huge supporter. I've got immersed in the geek world 6 years ago now. My partner is a bit of a campaigning uber geek and gave me quite a steep education in techno-political issues, as he put them. And I can see exactly why they're so important. And they mesh very closely with a lot of the other issues I've always known about and talked about because of my background. These sort of grassroots, as long as they're real grassroots, not astroturf, and they're sort of swelling up and people can do things, they can do it mindfully and securely and protect each other as well. I think it's fantastic. It's a bit like with WikiLeaks. As soon as I heard about that organisation years ago, I just thought this is exactly what we need. Whistleblowers need protection. And if there are means to protect those whistleblowers, and the old mainstream media is under attack on the whistleblowing front, and they can't protect whistleblowers properly anymore anyway. So these sort of outlets are incredibly important, and all power to them. But I mean, there have been issues with things like Sabu. He was in the Lulzsec group, wasn't he? He was turned by FBI or whatever. Yeah. That sort of thing can happen. I remember during the whistleblower years, a couple of our friends were caught out and pressurized by the secret police to report on us. And it's incredibly easy to do to someone who's been caught out in wrongdoing. I mean, the pressure on them, especially if they've got family and friends and kids at risk and things, is awful. So it's really, anyone who gets involved in Anonymous, it's not a hobby. This could potentially be life or death. If you think about 5 or 10 years down the line where, there's massive economic unrest like there is in Greece and the police and the security services crack down and you can be deemed to be a terrorist or a domestic extremist or whatever, always protect yourself and always protect those you work with because it's just too important not to.
Yeah.
No, it's true. I mean, Sabu was a bit of a dick though, but well, he actually didn't he get? He was coming out of a convenience store and he got arrested by the police. And he sort of said he was a Fed. He said he was an FBI agent to the police, which probably didn't help because he was actually pretending to be a FBI agent. So he wasn't the brightest of sparks, but no, it's completely true. And I always find it kind of interesting that people are saying that Anonymous was it's a CIA front, it's MI5 front. It's, it's one of these, it's created by the intelligence service. And I often think to myself, well, if it has, then it's completely gone out of control now because they don't know what they're doing anymore. Well, and so it's been started that way, but they've lost control of it now. But
absolutely. I mean, that's great. Even if it were the genesis of it, who cares? Because it's now got a life of its own. But little groups can be set up like that. I mean, there's no doubt about it. There was a case in the Netherlands, for example, where this isn't way back in the old days in the 70s, where the intelligence agency set up a fake Maoist group, which became this is sort of linked to the whole Chinese Revolution thing. And it became so successful that the activists in the group were invited over to meet Chairman Mao in China and things. And they were all intelligence agency people. So it does happen. But I think, if you've got a big democratic, fairly open, at least in terms of communication, organization, you get a sense of where people are coming from, what they're achieving, what they're doing, and those are the people you can trust. So, all power to you.
Yeah. I've got a question from one of our hosts, radio hosts. It's all about what's your views, I'm afraid. What's your views on the Christopher Dorner situation? Have you any input or anything you would like to say about that?
Again, it's one of those cases I'm sort of aware of, but I didn't really follow with any huge interest, so probably best not to comment.
Okay, so we'll leave it on that one.
I have quite a sort of, if I find a subject that I really go for, then that's it. I'm sort of delving into it, and that wasn't one that really floated my boat for some reason. I don't know. Okay,
no, that's fair enough. Schism, got another one?
Oh yeah, hold on. There's quite a lot of questions in here, and I'm just trying to find out which ones are relevant and which ones aren't.
This show should be called "What's Your View?" Definitely.
Yeah. I mean, is there anything you want to ask us? I mean, is there anything particularly you'd like to sort of speak to us about or ask us about, or?
I think we've covered a lot of the stuff. I mean, one is, I think what Anonymous stands for in its ethos is fantastic, and all power to all of you. Please go forth and prosper. But just also be so careful, because everything. If you need to go down that little bit of the paranoid path and really make sure that you protect yourselves, because it's not just about yourself; it's about protecting everyone that you're in contact with. It's mutual respect in that sense. So there's got to be a good protocol in place, because. And I don't want to get too heavy, but like I said, in a few years, you might all be deemed to be extremists or terrorists, whatever, by some shift in the law, and you've got to think ahead. So I've said for many years now, that the geeks are probably our best and last defence against the encroaching fascism and corporatism of the states. So, please carry on doing what you're doing.
Nice.
Thanks. No, I mean that's something that we all tell each other anyway about protecting each other and ourselves and so forth, and it's something we're always trying to get across. I mean, do you know anything about this corporation called Serco?
A little bit. Why?
Just wondered because it's something that came up in the news quite recently. I was watching, I think it was RT News that sort of sprang on me, and I was just wondering your thoughts on it because. It's a corporation that apparently controls pretty much everything in the UK. Everything from schools, hospitals, to nuclear bombs, to even the time that, we sort of look at, Greenwich Mean Time. And now it's kind of moved over to the United States and it's kind of controlling their military, their Air Force, the Department of Homeland Security. And it's kind of like, it's almost like, I think they stated on there that there's kind of a mother of all corporations.
It's going to be Skynet, isn't it?
Well, yeah, pretty much, yeah. And it's kind of like, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, is it something is it just a front? Is it really just a front for, one group of elites, maybe, like the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and that sort of stuff? Just one group of people just controlling everything? Is it another step towards the New World Order, you think?
Well, I think what we're looking at is consolidation of corporations. I mean, it's a bit like the American media, for example, have many, many different companies controlling mainstream media outlets, and now they've been consolidated down to 5. So, it's that consolidation is going on. But I think the basic problem is the outsourcing of our national sovereignties. I mean, the concept of a nation state these days, particularly in the West, is so retro in the 20th century. And this, of course, is one of the issues that so many of the open source advocates, the Electronic Freedom Foundation and Lawrence Lessig and many other people I know have been arguing about for years, which is if you allow these big corporations, be it Microsoft or Serco or whatever, to run fundamentally basic infrastructure for your country, then you're handing over your national sovereignty to an American corporation who will then do whatever they want to do under whatever new mad American law the mad and corrupt American politicians come up with. And that's what we're seeing with Serco. That's what we saw with Microsoft. That's what we're seeing with many other companies as well. And that is an issue. So effectively, our countries are owned by American companies now. Or pwned. Is that the phrase for geeks? Where you take over someone's computer? That's basically what they've done to our countries. So, you know, we've lost that. We are no longer sovereign states. And it makes me sad. Now I look at sort of the infighting going on between, you know, Conservatives or Lib Dems or Labour or whatever. It's so relevant. I mean, everyone says they're puppets of this, that and the other. And of course they are, but it's just stage managed, because whatever they say, whatever they do is irrelevant. Because as soon as some big American nasty law comes in, be it CIA kill lists for terrorists across the planet, or CIA kill lists for Americans within America now, or CISPA, or whatever it is, gets pushed through and rammed down our throats, and we all suffer for it. And if they, you know, some big American megacorp wants to pull the plug on our national defence system or whatever, they can just do it now. Well, in fact, they've always been able to do it in the UK with the nuclear deterrent, of course, because our so-called independent nuclear deterrent was not independent. All it was that we had to ask the Americans permission to press the button if we wanted to do it. So.
Yeah, it's getting ridiculous. And I don't know how it is in the UK, but I know in America that, you know, when they have presidential speeches or they have these election speeches between the two, you know, the Democrats or the Republicans, all their speeches are given to an independent group, which isn't independent at all, but, you know, it sort of sanitizes the questions and so forth. So they both have the right kind of questions. But so, I mean, what are your views on things like Iran, and how do you feel that's going to pan out in the future?
Oh, I think that's a really dangerous one. I mean, they were on the axis of evil that George Bush mentioned straight after 9/11. And they've knocked out pretty much all the other countries. I mean, apart from North Korea, which strangely is the only one that has flicked up two fingers at the US and developed nuclear capability at the time.
No, that's what it is. There's no oil in North Korea.
Well, there's that, but also North Korea is protected by China, and the US can't afford to take China on. And it's not just oil as well, of course. I mean, you know, look at what's going on in North Africa now, with Mali particularly. It's oil, of course, but it's also things like uranium and it's gold. And, you know, all these other sort of obscure metals that they need for the high-tech industries as well. They're trying to make sure that China can't get their mitts on them in Africa. But so America has now set up something called AFRICOM, the African Command Center, where they have a presence in 34 African countries in order to stop China getting in. I mean, it's just sick. But no, Iran, poor bloody Iran. I was involved in an event in Oxford a few weeks ago now. There's a wonderful group called the Sam Adams Associates for Integrity and Intelligence, which is a bit of a mouthful, which is basically a bunch of former spooks who've been involved in whistleblowing or, you know, conscience-type protests and things, who give an award every year for someone coming out of the intelligence agencies who has displayed integrity or done something with integrity around the intelligence. So previous winners have been people like Catherine Gunn, who was a GCHQ whistleblower in the run-up to the Iraq War in 2003, Colleen Rowley, who was an FBI whistleblower around 9/11, Ambassador Craig Murray, who's a British ambassador in Uzbekistan who exposed terrible torture there, which the Brits condoned, and also Julian Assange of WikiLeaks, who won it in 2010. So we gave the award this year to a man called Dr. Tom Finger, who is a visiting lecturer at Oxford University. And he was the man who coordinated the National Intelligence Estimate of 2007 on Iran. And this was the estimate gathered together from 16 US alphabet soup intelligence agencies. And he said all these agencies agree Iran stopped trying to develop a nuclear weapon in 2003. That's it. And this report has been reaffirmed every year since. Iran has stopped trying to produce a nuclear weapon, but you wouldn't believe that reading the bloody Western press, would you? No. They are saber-rattling, trying to find any excuse whatsoever to attack Iran. And it's just sick. So I fear for that country, I really do. I think many people have woken up to the realities of these sort of Middle Eastern colonial wars, like, you know, Iraq, Afghanistan, Somalia, Yemen, Libya, whatever. Syria as well is an ongoing one. But Iran is the bête noire of America and Israel. So the chance of them not getting attacked at some point, I think, are probably quite slim. It's very sad. But all credit to Dr. Tom Finger for what he did.
Yeah, totally. I mean, Iran is kind of an interesting. I mean, it's something I've been looking into quite a lot because it's got a lot of similarities to Libya in the sense that it has its own central bank, which Libya had.
Yes.
And it has its own oil. The only other thing it has that Libya didn't is as a threat to Israel, really.
Yes.
But only in the sense that it's trying to protect Palestine from. Because I saw an interview with the Iranian president, and he was talking about Palestine, and the interview was talking about Israel and how he reckons that Israel shouldn't exist, blah 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 blah. And he was kind of saying, well, what about Palestine? These people have a right to exist as well. They have thoughts, they have hopes, they have dreams. And what makes Israel more important? And it's quite interesting that there's quite a few sort of reasons other than the reason they keep touting, which is the nuclear bomb reason. There's definitely a lot of reasons for them to want to go into Iran. Because the first thing they did in Libya was set up a bank, which is quite
yes. Well, I think we're seeing the same thing. So, for example, in Iraq, Saddam Hussein started trying to trade whatever oil he was allowed to trade under all the sanctions, not using the petrodollar.
Yeah.
He wanted to trade the oil in euros. Iran opened a board about 5 years ago now to trade some of the oil that they trade in euros and rubles. And of course, that's when they upped the ante about they're developing a nuclear weapon, we've got to bomb them. And of course, Libya, as you say, exactly, didn't have one of these evil central banks, Western banks. And in fact, the year before Gaddafi was toppled, and let's not forget that Gaddafi was brought back into the international fold. He was, the West's new best friend. He wasn't a rogue at that point. He started talking about setting up a gold standard across Africa, he was going to call it the African dinar.
Yeah,
and this, again, would have taken the bottom out of the petrodollar monopoly. And then suddenly he became the new big rogue dictator who had to be toppled. So it's not just about oil, it's about how you trade oil. It's the currency in which you trade it. And that's when you become a major threat if you don't use dollars. Yeah,
totally. You can definitely see a connection with banking and the oil people and everybody else getting together and creating these kind of axes of evil, if you like. Which is why, probably another reason why North Korea has been kind of left to, set off nuclear bombs willy-nilly. And like you said, because of China, I mean, all China's got to do is put sanctions on us, and we're all buggered really because they must provide all our electronics.
Pretty much, yes. And also, they bought up so much US debt. If they wanted to pull the plug, they could. It would do them huge harm. But China's always worked on a very long-term basis. Don't forget the art of war, Sun Tzu. So at some point, they might well do it.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, listen. Have you just got any more final questions for any more before we pass over to Conrad?
Yeah, one more. That's a lolsy one, really. Which has sort of just come to mind.
You better explain what lolsy means.
What are your views on people like David Icke?
I don't really follow what he says, so again, not too many views.
Okay, well, that's that.
Okay. No, I mean, you asked me before, what do I focus on? As I said, it's sort of more the three wars, and I do think they're interconnected, and I do advise anyone who's listening to this to have a real delve into how the war on terror, how the war on drugs, and how the war on the internet are used and abused, and also interconnected, because it can put so many of us at threat, and it will put more and more of us at threat over the next few years if we just give away our freedoms more and more.
Wow. Just
a bit of a bummer to finish on, but
no, we'll finish on a good note. Before you go, when we were talking via email, you said you were off somewhere. Do you just can you elaborate on that and, just to bring us up to date so we might be able to follow what you're doing abroad?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm heading off to Iceland this Thursday. I've got a tour organised, so I'm going to be doing talks at universities and on the national media and with activist groups. There's going to be a hacktivist party there as well.
Wow.
So I'm going to be covering a whole range of issues, but particularly the war on drugs with my LEAP work. Because, of course, Iceland is a fascinating country at the moment with the way it's rethinking how its democracy should work post-financial crash and what the rights of the citizens should be and how accountable it could all be. So it's very much a democracy in flux, and it's a wonderful time to go there. So I'll be talking about the war on drugs, the war on terror, and, of course, the war on the internet, my three favourites. But I think it's going to be a really fun tour. And huge thanks to the people who've organised it. I won't name them because they might get embarrassed at this point, but it's going to be a good one. So I'll be tweeting and writing about it as well. So if people want to follow any of my stuff, it's going to be on my website, which is just animachon.ch. And yeah, I'll let you know how the crypto party goes. We'll be
Excellent.
doing it with Smyrie McCarthy, who's one of the big activists over there. He's helping to redraft the constitution around media freedoms and internet freedoms.
Excellent. So remember that, guys. Annie Machon at .ch, or you can follow her at Annie Machon on Twitter. I hope I'm saying your name right.
You are doing it beautifully. Thank you.
Lovely, lovely. Okay. Did you want to just finish off at all, Schism? Anything?
I'll just like to say that basically that I think any anon who hasn't looked into Iceland should definitely do so, because it was when it first got its new democracy, if you like, it kind of became a bit of a media blackout on it, because obviously they didn't want other people to know that you can actually arrest your own bankers and kick your government out. And I think it's one of those countries that is definitely going in the right direction. And I think they've just recently sent a minister, they kicked the FBI out recently for wanting to investigate WikiLeaks. And I think one of the ministers is actually now just going on to America to support Bradley Manning. So I think Iceland should definitely be something that every anon should look into and get as much information as they can out and pass it on to other people. And I think if Iceland's listening, if you ever want to sort of have a load of anons come over and live there, then we'd happily do so, because it sounds great.
We've just had one of our hosts say, I don't know if you're aware, Annie, were you aware of Operation Vendetta, November the 5th last year in the United Kingdom, when approximately 2,000 anonymous walked from Trafalgar Square to Parliament?
I was, yes. I saw it on the internet.
Yeah, well, we got another one coming up this year, and one of the hosts just said you're more than welcome to come and join us.
Well, you won't be able to see me because I'll be wearing a mask.
Exactly. Excellent.
But no, I will try and get there. I think it'd be great, and let's get as many people as we can. You know, that final scene from Vendetta is one of the most moving things I've ever seen in the cinema.
Beautiful, isn't it?
It was. In fact, I saw it the second day it was out, and it's the only time I've been in the cinema in central London where the audience stood up and clapped at the end of a film.
Wow. Oh, I'd love to have seen that. Oh, missed that one. Well, excellent. Okay, then. Well, Annie, well, listen, it's been brilliant having you on the show, and just wish you all the best for when you go off to Iceland. We'll keep an eye out on your webpage, and like I said, you're more than welcome. If there's stuff that you want to get out there and tell us, or any news, or any updates, or anything exciting, you're more than welcome to come on and tell us. So, you know, you're always welcome within Anonymous. So.
It will be my pleasure, thank you. In fact, we could perhaps do something from Iceland. I'll let you know.
Oh, that'd be brilliant.
Yeah,
yeah, just give me a shout via email. That'd be brilliant.
Actually, we could, thinking about it, we could do it from the crypto party.
Yeah, that'd
be great. People along.
Good idea. Yeah, if you get
that would be fun.
If we have people there as well, we can have the whole sort of group thing going on. That'd be quite cool.
I'll be in a room of geeks. They must be able to get the comms sorted.
Exactly.
I'll let you know. That'd be good fun.
Okay, yeah, just let me know via email.
Will do.
Okay,
Thank you very much for having me on tonight. It's been wonderful fun.
You're welcome, Annie. You take care and have a safe journey.
Thank you.
Okay,
bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye.
Well, there we go. That's Annie. Don't forget, you can look at Annie's website at anniemachon.ch and follow her online at Annie Machon. That's spelled Machon. So it's going to be good. Schism, before I close off the show, is there anything you want to say before we hand over to Conrad?
Just for people to be aware of the International Day of Privacy on the 23rd of February. There's also going to be a Big Brother event, UK, which is coming up soon, which is going to be great. Get involved with that. I mean, all of these things are important. They all involve you. They can affect you, and it's important that you all get on board with it, and we try to fight it before it becomes too late.
Yeah, before it's too late, because it's only a matter of time, isn't it?
Of course.
And that's it. Okay, then. Well, listen, guys, I'm going to finish off just with a non-dance, just to keep you in the mood, get you all revved up for Conrad's show. Schism, thank you so much for your info there and your talk. It's been brilliant. You know, I think a lot of people enjoyed the show, and it's great that we're going to have Annie possibly come back to us, especially this party one. That's going to be wicked. So
yeah, it would be awesome, wouldn't it? Yeah, definitely.
Okay, Schism, stay on the line. And guys, thank you so much for listening. And once again, listen out for the latest news. Get on Twitter, get on Facebook, and join us for the next big one for CDB, the Communication Data Bill. So for now, guys, have a good night, and I shall speak to you all soon.